They came like a storm from the edge of the world, horsemen who burned cities to dust and shattered the pride of kings. In the spring of 1241, Europe faced its darkest dawn. On the plains of Hungary, the earth itself trembled beneath the hooves of an empire that knew no mercy. This is the story of the day Europe burned and the night humanity learned the price of arrogance. The wind rose over the endless steppes of Mongolia, a sea of grass stretching farther than any eye could see. Dust billowed beneath thousands of hooves, swirling into the crimson dawn. The sun itself seemed dimmed by the storm of men and horses that thundered westward, carrying with it the weight of a new empire, the might of the great Khan's descendants. From the edges of Asia to the heart of Europe, the horizon glowed red, not with dawn, but with fire. It was the year 1241, and a tempest from the east was gathering. Batu Khan, grandson of the legendary Genghis Khan, rode at the front of this host. Though young, he bore a lineage of conquerors and the unrelenting duty of empire. His grandfather had united the steppe under one banner of eternal blue. His father and uncles had shattered Persia and Russia. Now Batu carried a new command, one spoken in the Council of Karakorum, to extend Mongol dominion to the westernmost lands to test the strength of Christendom itself. In his heart burned not only obedience to his ancestors, but also a hunger to carve his own name into the bones of Europe. Beside him rode the silent genius of war, Subutai, perhaps the greatest strategist the medieval world had ever known. He was no prince, no noble, but a smith's son who had risen through brilliance alone. Subutai had planned campaigns that spanned continents, conquering more lands than Alexander or Caesar. His mind was a map of movement and deception, of rivers and seasons. It was said that he saw battle not as chaos, but as a grand design in motion, one stroke leading to the next until victory was inevitable. He had crushed empires in the Caucasus and Kiev, modern-day Ukraine. Now his gaze turned toward the plains of Hungary, modern-day central Hungary, gateway to the heart of Europe. The campaign of 1241 had a clear purpose. The Mongols sought to punish the Kuman tribes, nomads who had once served under their command but fled westward into Hungary seeking refuge. To Subutai, this was unfinished business. To Batu, it was a divine pretext. Hungary lay in their path, and beyond it, the soft underbelly of the Latin West. The Mongol host would ride not merely for vengeance, but for dominion, carrying the great Khan's message to the farthest reaches of the earth. In Buda, modern-day Budapest, King Bela IV received alarming reports of smoke rising beyond the Carpathian mountains. He dismissed them as distant raids. The proud monarch believed in the chivalry of his knights, in the stone of his castles, and in the sanctity of Christian Europe. To him, the horsemen of the East were savages, unworthy of fear. He did not see that the empire approaching his borders was unlike any his knights had ever faced. An army that moved faster than thought, that fought without pause, that struck like lightning and vanished into silence. Far across the plains, a Mongol envoy stood before a parchment map of Europe, its edges burned and curling in the heat of a torch. The firelight danced across painted rivers and cities, Vienna, Krakow, Buda, each one a promise. Batu watched as the flame ate through the parchment, the map blackening under his gaze. "The West is weak," he murmured. "They have walls, but no unity." Subutai said nothing, only marked the rivers on a wooden board beside him, calculating paths of invasion as a musician might compose a song. As the nights deepened over the steppe, the Mongol drums began their thunderous cadence. The beat echoed across the empty plains, rolling like distant thunder. Tens of thousands of riders assembled beneath banners emblazoned with the great Khan's sigil. Their horses snorted clouds of steam into the frozen air. The sound of their armor was like rain falling upon a sea of iron. The empire of Genghis Khan was awakening once more. Then came the cry of the horn, a long, mournful sound that seemed to shake the stars. The signal for the march west had been given. Across rivers and forests, through snow and storm, the Mongol host advanced, a tide of motion swallowing everything in its path. Villages vanished into ash, forests fell beneath their hooves. The world trembled before a force it did not yet understand. In the stillness of the Hungarian plain, farmers worked their fields under the spring sun. The land was quiet, fertile, innocent. Children played beside the Sajo River in modern-day northeastern Hungary, and church bells rang faintly over the meadows. None yet knew that this land, this peaceful heart of Europe, was about to become a furnace of blood and smoke. The wind shifted. Far to the east, it carried the low rumble of drums and the faint haunting echo of hooves. The Mongols were coming. The steppe, once golden beneath the sun, began to darken as the dust of their march rose high into the heavens. It was as if a shadow had fallen over the world, moving ever westward. Each sunrise brought them closer. For Europe, this was the eve of its burning, the beginning of a storm that would leave kingdoms shattered and faith tested. Thus began the first act of a tragedy written in iron and fire, the day Europe burned. King Bela IV sat upon the throne of Hungary, and though his crown gleamed in the candlelight, his heart was heavy with unease. Messengers had come riding through mud and snow, their faces pale with fear, bearing tales of whole towns in the east vanishing under a cloud of arrows and fire. Yet when he gathered his council, his voice trembling with urgency, the lords of his realm met his words with scorn. The nobles laughed at his fears. To them, the Mongols were little more than wild horsemen, far from the chivalric order of Europe. "No barbarian could ever break our knights," one lord declared, his armor shining, his pride louder than sense. Bela's warning fell upon deaf ears. Each man at court was too consumed by his own quarrels and estates to see the shadow approaching over the horizon. The kingdom itself was already divided long before the first Mongol hoof touched Hungarian soil. For years, Bela had sought to reclaim the lands that his predecessors had granted to the magnates, dreaming of a stronger, centralized realm. The lords, accustomed to ruling their domains like small kings, resisted him bitterly. The air of the royal palace in Esztergom, in modern-day Hungary, was thick with whispers and resentment, of taxes, conscription, and betrayal. When Bela spoke of raising a unified army to defend the realm, his words were met with cold silence. "Let those who believe in this phantom threat pay for it themselves," a baron muttered, and others nodded. To make matters worse, the arrival of the Cumans, nomadic people who had fled from the Mongol advance across the steppe, had plunged Hungary into chaos. Bela, seeking allies, had welcomed them and even baptized their leader Kuthin into Christianity. But the Cumans, fierce and foreign, unsettled the townsfolk and nobility alike. Rumors spread like disease, that the Cumans were spies for the Mongols, that they sent secret signals across the plains. When a murder broke out in Pest, now part of Budapest, the mob turned on the Cuman refugees. Streets ran red with blood as Hungarian citizens slaughtered those who had come seeking sanctuary. In the palace that night, candles flickered weakly against the cold stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of wax and fear. Around a long oak table sat the lords of Hungary, their faces half lit, half shadowed. Armor creaked, and the faint clink of swords resting at their sides punctuated every word. Their voices rose and fell, some urging caution, others calling for war. Bela's fingers tightened around the armrest of his throne. The arguments were endless, looping like a serpent devouring its own tail. No unity, no resolve, only pride and suspicion. Then came the Mongol envoy. He entered the court draped in furs, eyes sharp as a blade. His words were few and deliberate. "My master, the great Khan, commands that your king submit to his rule. If you obey, Hungary will prosper under his peace. If you resist, your land will burn, your people will perish." The hall fell silent. Even the torches seemed to dim. Bela stood, his face pale but his chin high. Without a word, he took the scroll from the envoy's hands, tore it apart, and let the fragments fall to the floor. The sound of parchment ripping echoed like thunder in the chamber. That act of defiance, born of pride and desperation, sealed Hungary's fate. The envoy bowed slightly, a shadow of a smile touching his lips, then turned and left without another word. Outside, his horse pawed the ground, impatient, as if it too knew what would come. Far away on the eastern frontier, Subutai was already preparing. His spies had mapped every river and crossing, every mountain pass through the Carpathians, now spanning parts of Slovakia, Poland, Ukraine, and Romania. He studied the routes like a hunter, tracing the steps of his prey. "They will not stand united," he murmured to one of his captains. "We will strike where their pride blinds them most." His orders moved swiftly through the night. Detachments were to advance quietly, testing the borders, cutting the scouts, sowing fear before the full assault began. Back in Esztergom, Bela could not sleep. The candles in his chamber had burned low, their wax dripping steadily onto the map laid before him. The rivers of Hungary ran black beneath the melting light. A drop of wax fell, slow and heavy, landing on the spot marked Sajo River. It hardened there, a pale, glistening wound on the parchment. Outside, the wind whispered across the Danube, carrying the faint echo of distant hooves. Somewhere beyond those mountains, an army was stirring, a storm-gathering force, a silence sharpening into thunder. Bela did not know it yet, but the drop of wax had fallen upon the place where his kingdom would bleed. Spring had barely thawed the frozen steppes when Subutai unleashed his grand design. 3 strikes, 3 paths, 1 storm. It was the famed triple assault, a masterpiece of synchronized destruction. From the plains of modern-day Ukraine, the Mongol host divided like a river splitting into torrents. One surged north into Poland, one swept south through Transylvania, now part of Romania, and the central force prepared to break through the main valley that led straight into the heart of Hungary. Subutai himself oversaw the movement like a chess master setting his final pieces, his mind decades ahead of the men who opposed him. To the north, the banner of Batu's cousin Orda Khan rode into Poland, where knights of Christendom gathered beneath their crosses, certain that faith and steel could stop the horde. On the 9th day of April in the year 1241, their hope died at the Battle of Legnica in modern-day southwestern Poland. The flower of European chivalry, armored men from Bohemia, Silesia, and the Teutonic Order were surrounded and annihilated. Mongol arrows fell like rain, the air was thick with smoke and cries of despair. The survivors fled toward the west, bearing tales of an unstoppable storm, but their words reached too late. The north was burning. To the south, another wing under the General Baidar crossed the frozen ridges of the Carpathian mountains. Snow lashed their faces, and the wind howled like wolves through the passes. Yet the Mongol cavalry pressed on. They drove their hardy steppe ponies through the drifts, leaving behind trails of ash and bones. Villages that resisted were torched to the ground. The Mongols advanced not only with spears and bows, but with fire itself, a weapon of terror that broke the spirit of resistance long before the first clash of steel. By the time they reached the plains of Transylvania, the local fortresses lay abandoned, their gates swinging open in the wind. Subutai, directing the central army, turned his eyes toward the Sajo River basin, in modern-day northeastern Hungary. His scouts reported the terrain: rivers thick with spring melt, valleys narrow and easily fortified. To him, these were not obstacles, they were opportunities. He ordered his engineers to build floating bridges, lash rafts from timber and animal hides, and construct roads where none existed. Within days, the impossible had been done. An entire army, tens of thousands strong, was moving through mountain paths where no European host could have passed. It was a feat of logistics so astounding that later chroniclers compared it to the works of demons. Meanwhile, on the western side of the mountains, Hungarian sentries stood watch along the frontier. They saw only distant columns of smoke rising thin and black against the horizon. Some believed it the work of raiders or perhaps forest fires. The stories from Poland sounded too fantastical to be true. No army could move that fast, one captain muttered. Yet even as he spoke, the faint tremor of hooves shivered through the earth. Then came the sound, the dull, rhythmic pounding like a heartbeat from the east. The horizon quivered. The smoke was not from forests, it was from towns. The first skirmishes began almost playfully. Mongol detachments appeared at the edges of villages, loosed a few arrows, and retreated as Hungarian scouts gave chase. The Hungarians, proud and untested against such an enemy, pursued eagerly, straight into the waiting trap. Subutai's tactic of feigned retreat unfolded with devastating precision. The Mongols fled in apparent panic, luring their pursuers deeper into ravines where hidden archers and cavalry waited in silence. The chase ended in slaughter. Of the Hungarian scouts who crossed the border that week, few ever returned to tell what they had seen. The rhythm of war grew faster now, like drums echoing across the valleys. From every ridge of the Carpathians, black banners snapped in the wind. The Mongol symbols, wolves, suns, and the eternal blue sky, fluttered above the snow. For the peasants hiding in their huts, the world itself seemed to roar. As the main host poured into the Hungarian plain, the skies darkened with the smoke of burning thatch. Roads were choked with refugees, their carts laden with what little they could save. Monasteries were looted, churches gutted. The Mongols moved with the precision of a single body. Every movement calculated, every retreat deliberate. The land groaned beneath the weight of their passing. Far behind them, at a lonely border post, the body of a Hungarian envoy swayed from a wooden stake. His face was turned toward the west, eyes open to the direction of the aid he had sought but never received. In his stiff hand, still clutched against his breast, was the letter he had meant to deliver, a plea for help to the kings of Europe. The wind tugged at the parchment until it tore, scattering fragments across the blood-stained snow, and thus the fire spread. The steppes had reached the heart of Europe, and the air itself seemed to tremble with the coming storm. The plain of Mohi lay quiet beneath the early spring moon, a vast stretch of mist and silence, broken only by the sluggish current of the Szajó River in modern-day northeastern Hungary. It was a lonely place, flat and exposed, where the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. Only one bridge crossed the river, a narrow wooden span, old and weathered. To most, it was a crossing of no significance. To Subutai, it was destiny. Here the armies of Hungary gathered, their camp sprawling like a city of tents and wagons. King Bela IV had brought his nobles, knights, and soldiers, tens of thousands of men armored in steel and faith. Around their camp, they formed a circle of wagons chained together, a crude fortress they believed impregnable. Fires flickered along the perimeter, casting long shadows on the wet grass. Within the circle, the king knelt in prayer, while the nobles argued over tactics and honor. They did not know that every whisper, every spark was already watched by unseen eyes. As darkness deepened, the stillness broke. From across the river came a low rumble, the hollow thunder of drums. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, and chilling. It echoed through the fog, carrying with it the illusion of countless riders. The Mongols had begun their deception. Horns blared faintly, and the sound of galloping hooves reached the Hungarian camp. Soldiers rushed to the ramparts, clutching their spears, peering into the blackness. Somewhere out there, beyond the shimmering water, the enemy moved. On the riverbank, Hungarian sentries lit their torches, and the flames reflected off their helmets like small suns. The river whispered beneath them, dark and patient. Every so often, from across the mist, came the faint hiss of a bowstring and the whistle of an arrow. Men fell silently where they stood, their armor ringing faintly as they hit the ground. The darkness itself seemed alive. Then, without warning, the Mongols struck, or seemed to. Batu Khan sent a vanguard charging toward the bridge, shouting war cries that split the night. Arrows flashed through the air like streaks of silver. The Hungarians rallied, cheering as they held the crossing. It looked for a moment as though they had forced the invaders to retreat. Trumpets blared in triumph. But far away, hidden behind the ridges and swamps, Subutai watched with cold satisfaction. This was not defeat. It was the first step of the trap. He had ordered the dragon's jaws to close. While the vanguard distracted the enemy with feigned assaults on the bridge, he led his main force on a silent march through the darkness. Engineers, those same tireless men who had built bridges across the Carpathians, now worked in complete silence to construct another crossing downstream. They lashed together rafts of leather and rope, moving under cover of night and fog. When the first faint light of dawn began to pale the eastern sky, an entire army was waiting behind the Hungarian camp, ready to strike. Across the main front, a smaller detachment of Mongols waded into the river. These were the chosen ones, men who expected not to return. Carrying small barrels of powder and primitive fire lances, learned from their Chinese engineers, they crept through the mist. Suddenly, an explosion ripped the air. Smoke rolled across the water, blinding the defenders. Firelight flashed upon the ripples like molten gold. To the Hungarians, who had never seen such weapons, it seemed as if the river itself had caught flame. Confusion turned to panic. King Bela, hearing the uproar, believed victory was near. "The enemy retreats," his captains shouted. Convinced that the Mongols were breaking, he gave the order to pursue across the bridge. Knights spurred their horses into the smoke, banners streaming. It was then that Subutai struck. From behind, his hidden divisions erupted from the marshland, cutting off the bridge and encircling the camp. Arrows rained from all directions. The wagons that had once formed a fortress now became a prison. Horses screamed, men shouted prayers that vanished into the roar of war. Bela realized too late that the battle was lost before it had begun. The bridge buckled under the weight of men and horses. Flames leapt higher as the smoke thickened, smothering the stars. Through the haze, the reflection of fire danced upon the water, a crimson sheen upon steel and blood. The Sajo River boiled with chaos. Armor gleamed one final moment before sinking beneath the current. By dawn, the cries had faded. The water carried away the dead, and the plain of Mohi was silent once more. The trap had closed, and the fate of Hungary was sealed. Dawn broke over the plains of Mohi like the lifting of a shroud. The smoke drifted apart, and what it revealed was no battlefield. It was a vision of hell. Bodies of men and horses lay tangled in the mud, their armor blackened, their banners torn and half buried beneath the dead. The air was heavy with the stench of blood and burned leather. Ravens circled above the carnage, their cries the only sound that dared disturb the silence of ruin. The Sajo River, in modern-day northeastern Hungary, ran dark and sluggish, carrying with it the lifeless forms of those who had fallen in the night. But the killing was not over. As the sun rose, the Mongol army tightened its circle. Arrows darkened the sky again, falling in endless waves. Drums beat in an unbroken rhythm, and the ground itself seemed to pulse beneath the thunder of hooves. From every direction, death advanced. Subutai had unleashed every instrument of destruction his vast empire could bring to bear. Bows that could pierce armor at 200 paces, fire lances spitting sparks and flame, great stone throwers that hurled boulders into the packed ranks of Hungary's finest knights. Europe had never seen such a union of ancient craft and cold precision. The knights of Hungary fought bravely, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. They lowered their lances and charged back, their horses pounding the ground like rolling thunder. For a moment, their courage seemed unbreakable. The first Mongol lines bent, and shouts of triumph rose from the Hungarian camp. But then the trap closed once more. Light cavalry circled behind them, striking from all sides. The knights, bound by their heavy armor and the narrow space between wagons, could not maneuver. One by one, the proud banners of the lords of Esztergom, of Transylvania, of the royal guard fell into the mud. Subutai's control of the battlefield was absolute. He moved his forces as if conducting a grim symphony, one division advancing to draw attention, another wheeling to strike, all moving in deadly harmony. Every Hungarian counterattack found itself swallowed by the same invisible tide. When one section of the camp faltered, Mongol engineers broke through the wagon lines with fire and smoke, driving wedges into the Hungarian defenses. Within hours, the once grand army of Bela IV had become a mass of isolated pockets, fighting and dying without command or hope. To those trapped within, the world had turned to chaos. Arrows fell like rain. The wind itself seemed to scream. Horses reared and collapsed. Men trampled one another in their desperation to flee the flames. The air was thick with ash and iron and the metallic taste of blood. One Hungarian soldier, his eyes wide with disbelief, that saw the horizon shimmering with heat and smoke. In that blur, friend and foe became one indistinguishable shadow. He could not tell where the battle ended and the nightmare began. In the heart of the confusion, King Bela tried to rally what remained of his men. His voice was hoarse, his armor dented, his horse foaming at the mouth. Around him, the royal standard was barely visible through the haze. A sudden rush of Mongol horsemen broke through the smoke, their arrows whistling past his head. The king's guards closed ranks, shouting for him to flee. One by one they fell, struck down as they shielded their sovereign with their bodies. Bela was pulled from the field by a handful of survivors, his royal cloak torn and smeared with blood. He escaped only because others chose to die in his place. Behind him, the last defenses crumbled. The Hungarian camp erupted into a single inferno of death. Wagons burned, tents collapsed, men screamed as they were cut down or trampled. The earth itself seemed to weep red. When the fighting finally ceased, the soil of Sajo was soaked in blood, so deep it glistened beneath the morning sun. It was the day Europe burned, a day that would echo across centuries as a warning of what human pride and division could bring. High above the devastation, on a small rise overlooking the river, Subutai sat astride his horse. His armor was spattered with mud, but his gaze was clear and unflinching. The cries of the dying drifted up to him like the fading notes of a song. Around him, his captains awaited his word, their faces calm, their victory complete. Subutai said nothing. He looked upon the ruin of a kingdom and felt only the cold satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. The sunlight caught in his eyes, hard and sharp as steel. Hungary had been broken. Europe had been warned. And the wind carried eastward the sound of drums, the rhythm of an empire that knew no mercy. The wind that once carried the thunder of hooves now blew cold and hollow across the wasted plains. The fires of Mohi had burned themselves out, leaving only smoke and silence. King Bela IV fled westward, his crown hidden beneath a hood, his kingdom scattered behind him like dust. He rode through villages that no longer existed, through fields that had become graveyards. When he reached Zagreb, in modern-day Croatia, he hoped for sanctuary. But even there, safety was an illusion. Driven by desperation, Bela sought refuge in Austria. Yet the Duke of Austria, Frederick II, saw in him not a broken monarch, but an opportunity. Instead of offering protection, the Duke had him seized and held for ransom. The King of Hungary, once ruler of vast lands, now sat as a prisoner in a foreign court, forced to pay for his freedom with what little remained of his treasury. In his eyes burned both grief and humiliation, the last embers of a king whose world had collapsed in fire. Back in Hungary, there was little left to ransom. The great cities of the realm, Esztergom, Vach, Eger, were piles of charred stone. The walls of Pest, now part of Budapest, had melted under the heat of Mongol fire. The fields were untended, the churches silent. Those who survived the battle had fled into the forests, where they starved or died of disease. The once proud kingdom had become a wasteland haunted by silence. Even the rivers, swollen by spring rains, seemed to carry sorrow in their slow, dark currents. Subutai, meanwhile, did not rest. Victory was never enough for the generals of the great Khan. He turned his armies west into the region of Transdanubia in modern-day Western Hungary, where he ordered the destruction of bridges and villages alike, cutting off all routes of escape and resistance. The Mongols advanced methodically, leaving behind nothing but smoke. Their horsemen moved like shadows, striking where life still flickered and then disappearing into the mist. Entire valleys were emptied, their inhabitants vanishing into the endless maw of conquest. For the common people, there was no escape, only endurance. Mothers clutched their children in burning houses, whispering prayers to saints that could no longer hear them. The sound of Mongol hooves faded, but their terror lingered. Farmers hid beneath frozen earth, monks buried their relics beneath church floors. In the ashes of one village, a single bell continued to ring, swaying in the wind, a lonely echo of faith amidst desolation. Some nobles, seeing no hope, surrendered. They opened the gates of their castles and knelt before the conquerors, offering keys and tribute in exchange for their lives. Yet mercy was fleeting. For every city spared, another was razed to the ground. The chronicles written years later would call it the White Burning of Hungary, for the fire had cleansed the land of life itself, leaving only pale ruins behind. Across the western frontiers, word of the catastrophe spread like wildfire. In Vienna, in Venice, in Rome, fear took root. Messengers whispered of a storm unlike any Europe had ever known, of an army that fought without sleep or mercy, that killed kings as easily as peasants. Spies of the papal court spoke in hushed tones. If they do not stop, Rome will be next. The Holy See called for prayer, but even faith trembled before the memory of Mohi. On maps drawn by trembling hands, the red of conquest spread across Central Europe. Kingdoms that once stood proud now appeared as fragile borders inked on parchment, soon to be swallowed by the same tide. In the courts of France and Germany, armor was polished, walls were strengthened, and every bell that rang seemed to toll in warning. The continent held its breath, waiting for the next blow. But for now, there was only stillness. Winter came early, laying its pale shroud across the plains of Hungary. Snow drifted softly over the blackened earth, covering the bodies that no one remained to bury. The wind moaned through the broken wagons, the shattered lances, the silent camp where once a nation had stood. The storm had passed, but in its wake, only the dead remained. As winter deepened over the ravaged plains, the impossible happened. The storm began to recede. Word came from the east like a whisper carried on the frozen wind. The great Khan Ogedei, ruler of the Mongol Empire, was dead. He had collapsed after a night of heavy drinking in Karakorum, thousands of miles away across deserts and mountains. With his death, the heart of the empire fell silent. Tradition demanded that all princes of Genghis Khan's lineage return home to elect a new supreme ruler. The call was absolute. Even conquest bowed before it. Inside the Mongol camp on the Danube in modern-day Hungary, tension replaced triumph. Batu Khan, commander of the Western expedition, received the summons with grim uncertainty. The empire stretched too wide, the rivalries among the Khan's descendants too deep. If he lingered in the West while others hurried eastward to claim their influence, he risked losing not only command, but life itself. Yet Subutai, the old general whose mind had built the empire's victories, argued fiercely against retreat. "The road to Vienna lies open," he said, his voice low but steady. "Europe is broken. One more campaign, and the world is ours." Batu did not answer immediately. Outside his tent, the wind howled through the blackened trees, and the scent of ash still lingered from the cities they had burned. Subutai's gaze burned with the fire of unfinished conquest, but Batu's thoughts turned toward Karakorum, toward the other princes who would soon gather to choose the next great Khan. Power, not battle, would now decide the future. In that balance of ambition and fear, the decision was made. The Mongol army would withdraw. Chroniclers of later centuries debated the reason for this strange retreat. Some said it was obedience to custom, others that Batu feared losing control of his army so far from home. A few believed the Mongols had already achieved their purpose. The Cumans were destroyed, their flight ended, the Hungarian kingdom lay in ruins, and Europe, though still standing, was broken in spirit. Subutai's campaign had proven that no fortress, no chivalric order, could withstand the machinery of Mongol warfare. To continue westward might have been glorious, but unnecessary. That final night, the Mongol camp burned with quiet light. Flames flickered in iron braziers, throwing shifting patterns across the snow. Men packed their saddlebags, mended their harnesses, whispered of distant steps and home. Subutai stood apart, his armor reflecting the firelight. He turned his eyes westward, toward the unseen lands beyond the Danube. "I will return," he murmured, though whether it was a promise or a curse, none could tell. The embers glowed in his gaze, fading slowly into darkness. When spring came, the horsemen of the great Khan began their journey back through the Carpathians. The thunder of hooves that had once shaken Europe now dwindled into the distance. Across the plains, their trails stretched like scars in the snow, endless lines of prints marking the passage of death itself. Behind them lay silence, and the bones of a kingdom that would take generations to heal. King Bela returned from his exile at last. He crossed the same plains where his armies had perished, his eyes hollow with the knowledge of what he would find. Cities reduced to ashes, fields empty of farmers, bells rusted in the ruins of churches. Hungary was no longer a nation, it was a wound. And yet, within that wound, life began to stir again. Bela set himself to the impossible task of rebuilding. He ordered the construction of stone fortresses, walls that could defy the siege engines of any empire. He invited settlers to repopulate the land, granted freedoms to towns, and planted the seeds of a new Hungary, one forged from ruin. His people would call him later the second founder of the kingdom, for from the ashes he raised the bones of a nation. Far to the east, the last echoes of Mongol horns faded beyond the mountains. Their hoofbeats became whispers in the wind, a memory drifting across the frozen steppe. Europe waited, breath held, certain they would return one day. But the riders did not come back. The great storm had passed. The plain lay quiet once more, blanketed in snow that shimmered under the pale light of dawn. It covered the ruins, the bones, the blood. Only the wind remained, singing softly over the empty fields. The age of fire had ended, and the world, scarred but still breathing, turned slowly toward its next dawn. When the Mongols withdrew in the spring of 1242, they left behind not just ruins, but revelation. The kingdoms of Europe, which had once rested secure behind their stone walls and codes of chivalry, awoke to a terrible truth. Fortresses alone could not save them. The old ways of war, slow and proud, had been shattered by speed, deception, and intelligence. Across courts and monasteries, the lesson spread. Only unity, foresight, and adaptability could stand against such storms. A new Europe was being born, one that would learn to move, to spy, to plan, not merely to pray. Hungary, the kingdom that had suffered most, became the first to rise from the ashes. Under the weary but unbroken hand of King Bela IV, the nation began its rebirth. He called craftsmen and masons from distant lands, ordering that towns be rebuilt in stone, not wood, and that every settlement strong enough to stand be walled. Castles rose from the ruins, Visegrad, Diosgjur, and countless others, forming a chain of defense across the land. What had once been the heart of disaster became the shield of Europe. To later generations, Bela was remembered as the new founder, the king who forged strength from sorrow. The West, meanwhile, could not ignore the tremors of that year. Popes and emperors who once dismissed the East as a distant world now sent envoys across deserts and steppes to learn of these riders who had nearly consumed them. Franciscan and Dominican friars journeyed as far as Karakorum, bringing back not only news, but understanding. Out of the ashes of war, the first embers of contact between East and West began to glow. Trade routes reopened, maps expanded, and through the fear of conquest came the beginnings of curiosity, the earliest threads of global exchange. Yet Mohi itself remained more than history. It became a wound etched into the conscience of Europe, a reminder of how swiftly glory can turn to ruin. The plains of Saho, where the flower of Hungarian knighthood had perished, became sacred ground. Poets and chroniclers wrote of that day as a symbol of Europe's fragility before the boundless strength of the East. For centuries afterward, the name of the Mongols would linger in European speech as a whisper of fear, a legend of fire that once devoured the world. Subutai and Batu, too, lived on in memory, not as villains, but as figures of awe. Historians from every age would name them among the greatest strategists to walk the earth. Subutai, the silent genius whose campaigns spanned continents, and Batu, the princely conqueror who carried the banner of empire to the edge of Christendom. Together, they reshaped warfare forever. Their tactics of mobility, intelligence, and coordination would echo through centuries of military thought, from the steppes to the empires yet unborn. In the culture of Europe, the story of 1241 came to bear a single name: the day Europe burned. It was told not merely as tragedy, but as warning that no nation, however proud, is beyond defeat, and no civilization, however advanced, is safe from its own blindness. The Mongols had come and gone like a storm, but their passing had burned into the memory of the West an indelible truth, that survival belongs not to the strong, but to those who learn. Now the plains of Hungary lie quiet once more. The wind carries the scent of grass instead of smoke. Where once stood the fallen, flowers bloom in silent testimony. Nature has reclaimed the earth that men turned to ash, and the river Sajo flows again, clear, indifferent, eternal. Yet beneath its waters lie the bones of knights and horsemen, of peasants and kings, all equal now in death. The sun sinks over the horizon, gilding the land in gold. The world turns, centuries pass, empires rise and fall. But if one listens closely, the wind still seems to whisper across the steppe and the plain, carrying with it a memory too heavy to die. The fire has gone out, but its smoke still drifts upon the sky of history.